The sun beat down like a hammer on the cracked earth. Tom Riley stood on his front porch, looking out at what used to be green pastures. Now it was just brown dirt with deep cracks running through it like scars. His cattle stood under the few trees that still had some shade, but even those trees looked sick and tired. Tom had been a rancher for 20 years. His father was a rancher before him and his grandfather too. The Riley family had worked this land for almost 100 years. But Tom had never seen anything like this drought. No rain for 6 months. The grass was gone. The creek that used to run through his property was now just a line of dry rocks. He walked down the steps and headed toward the barn. His boots kicked up little clouds of dust with each step. Inside the barn, his foreman Pete was filling water troughs from the well. Pete was an old cowboy who had worked for Tom's father. He knew cattle better than anyone. "Morning, boss," Pete said without looking up. "Water level's dropping again. We might need to drill deeper." Tom nodded and looked at the cattle through the barn door. These weren't just any cattle. They were special. His great-grandfather had started this herd with the best bulls and cows he could find. Each generation of the Riley family had worked to make the herd better. These cattle were strong, healthy, and worth a lot of money. At least they used to be. Now the cattle looked thin. Their ribs were starting to show. The grass was gone and hay cost more money than Tom had. He was feeding them everything he could afford, but it wasn't enough. Every day they got a little thinner. Tom walked back to the house and sat at his kitchen table. Bills were spread out in front of him. Electric bill, feed bill, mortgage payment, insurance. The numbers made his head hurt. He had maybe 2 months before the bank would start asking serious questions about his loan payments. The phone rang. It was his neighbor, Bill Johnson. "Tom, I just wanted to let you know I'm selling my herd next week," Bill said. His voice sounded tired. "Can't afford to feed them anymore. Thought you should know in case you want to do the same." After Tom hung up, he sat in silence. Bill's ranch was bigger than his. If Bill was selling, things were really bad. Tom looked out the window at his cattle again. Some of them had been born right here on the ranch. He knew each one by sight. The idea of selling them felt like giving up on everything his family had built. But what choice did he have? That evening, Pete came to the house. They sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the sunset. The sky was beautiful, all orange and red, but there wasn't a cloud anywhere. "Pete, what do you think about taking the herd to Millfield?" Tom asked. Pete was quiet for a long moment. Millfield was 2 days away by truck, but they didn't have money for trucks. They would have to drive the cattle there the old way, like cowboys did 100 years ago. "Millfield's got better prices," Pete said slowly. "But it's a hard journey, especially in this heat." "I know," Tom said, "but the local auction house is offering half what the cattle are worth. At Millfield, I might get enough to pay off some debts and keep the ranch going." Pete nodded. "How many head you thinking of taking?" 40 of the best ones," Tom said. "Leave the rest here and hope for rain." They sat in silence again. Both men knew this might be the beginning of the end for the Riley ranch. But sometimes a man has to take a chance even when the odds are bad. The next morning, Tom woke up before sunrise. He had made his decision. He would take 40 head of his best cattle to Millfield. It was a risk, but doing nothing was a bigger risk. If he could get good prices at the auction, he might be able to save the ranch. If not, at least he would have tried. He called 2 cowboys he knew, Jimmy and Carlos. They were good men who needed work. He couldn't pay them much, but they agreed to help drive the cattle to Millfield. They would leave in 2 days. Tom spent the morning picking out which cattle to take. It was like choosing which of his children to send away. Each cow and bull had a story. This one was born during a terrible storm. That one was the daughter of his prize bull. Another was so friendly she would eat from his hand, but he picked the 40 healthiest ones. These were the cattle that would bring the best prices. If he was going to risk everything on this trip, he needed to take the animals that would give him the best chance. That afternoon, he called the bank. The loan officer was polite but firm. Tom had 60 days to make his next payment, or they would start talking about taking the ranch. 60 days. That gave him time to make this trip work. As the sun set on his second day of preparation, Tom stood in the same spot on his porch where this story began. The cattle he had chosen were in the corral near the barn. Jimmy and Carlos would arrive tomorrow morning. Everything was ready. Tom's wife had died 3 years ago from cancer. Since then, it had just been him and Pete trying to keep the ranch going. He missed her advice. She always knew what to do when things got tough. Now he had to make this decision alone. But as he looked at his cattle in the corral, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe this crazy plan would work. Maybe 40 head of his best cattle would be enough to save the ranch his great-grandfather had started. Maybe there was still a future for the Riley name on this land. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to Millfield. 2 days through country Tom didn't know well, with everything he owned on the line. It was the biggest gamble of his life. He went inside and set his alarm for 4 in the morning. They would start early before the heat got too bad. Tom looked at the old photo on his kitchen table. 4 generations of Riley men standing in front of the barn. His great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, and himself. "Don't let me be the one who loses it all," he whispered to the photo. Then he went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. The morning started perfect. The sun came up bright and clear, and there was even a little breeze to keep the heat down. Tom, Pete, Jimmy, and Carlos had the 40 head of cattle moving by 5 in the morning. The animals seemed to know they were going somewhere important. They walked in a steady line, following the old cattle trail that headed toward Millfield. By noon, they had covered good ground. The cattle were moving well, and the men were feeling confident. They stopped by a small creek to let the animals drink. There wasn't much water, but it was enough. Tom checked his map. They were making better time than expected. "At this pace, we'll reach Millfield tomorrow afternoon," Pete said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Good," Tom replied. "The auction starts the day after. We'll have time to rest the cattle and get them ready." But around 3 in the afternoon, Jimmy pointed to the western sky. "Boss, look at that." Dark clouds were building on the horizon. They looked angry and dangerous. Tom had seen clouds like that before. They meant trouble. "How fast are they moving?" Carlos asked. Tom studied the sky. The clouds were getting bigger and darker by the minute. "Too fast," he said. "We need to find shelter." But they were in the middle of nowhere. Open grassland stretched in every direction. There were a few trees here and there, but nothing that would protect 40 head of cattle from a bad storm. The wind started picking up. At first it felt good because it cooled them down, but then it got stronger. The cattle started getting nervous. Their ears were up and they kept looking at the sky. "We need to keep them together," Pete shouted over the wind. "If they scatter in a storm, we'll never find them all." The 4 men spread out around the herd, trying to keep the cattle calm. But the animals could sense what was coming. Some of them started moving faster, trying to get away from the approaching storm. Then Tom saw the lightning. It was still far away, but it was getting closer. Big white flashes that lit up the dark clouds. A few seconds later, the thunder rolled across the prairie like a train. "This is going to be bad," Jimmy said. The first raindrops were huge. They hit the ground like bullets, kicking up little puffs of dust. Then the rain got harder. And harder. Within minutes, it was pouring so hard that Tom could barely see the cattle in front of him. The lightning was right above them now. Flash after flash with thunder that shook the ground. The cattle were terrified. Some of them started running. Pete and Carlos rode hard to turn them back, but it was like trying to hold back a river. Then the hail started. Ice balls the size of marbles began falling from the sky. They hit the ground with loud popping sounds. The cattle went crazy. They were running in all directions, trying to escape the hail that was hitting them like rocks. Tom's horse was dancing under him, scared by the lightning and thunder. He could barely control the animal. The hail was hitting his hat and shoulders, stinging even through his thick jacket. "We're losing them," Pete yelled through the storm. Tom could see cattle running away into the gray wall of rain and hail. All his hopes for saving the ranch were disappearing into the storm. But there was nothing he could do. The storm was too strong. Then through the rain he saw a light. It was far away, but it looked like it was coming from a house. Tom squinted through the storm and saw more lights. It was definitely a ranch house, maybe a mile away. "There," he shouted to the others, pointing toward the lights. "We need to get there." The 4 men worked together to turn the remaining cattle toward the distant lights. It was the hardest work Tom had ever done. The rain was so heavy he could barely breathe. The lightning was everywhere. The cattle were slipping and sliding in the mud that was forming under their feet. But slowly they got the herd moving in the right direction. Tom counted as they went. They had started with 40 head. Now he could only see about 30, maybe less. The storm had scattered the rest across miles of prairie. As they got closer to the lights, Tom could see it was a nice ranch house with a big barn and several corrals. It looked like the kind of place where people who really knew about cattle lived. Tom rode ahead of the herd and up to the house. He jumped off his horse and ran to the front door. He was soaking wet and covered in mud. Hail was still falling, though not as hard as before. He knocked on the door, hoping someone was home. After a few seconds, the door opened. A woman stood there, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and kind eyes. She was holding a cup of coffee and looked surprised to see a muddy cowboy at her door in the middle of a storm. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you," Tom said quickly. "My name is Tom Riley. I've got a herd of cattle out here and we're caught in this storm. Is there any chance we could use your corrals for the night?" The woman looked past Tom and saw the cattle and the other cowboys in the rain. Without hesitating, she said, "Of course. Bring them into the big corral behind the barn. There's hay in the barn if you need it." "Thank you," Tom said. "I can pay you for the hay and for using your corrals." "We'll worry about that later," she said. "Right now, let's get those animals out of this storm. My name is Anna, by the way. Anna Martinez." Tom tipped his hat and ran back to help move the cattle. Anna came out too, putting on a rain jacket. She helped guide the cattle into the big corral behind her barn. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't the first time she had dealt with cattle in a storm. It took another hour to get all the cattle safely into the corral and to get the horses into the barn. By then, the worst of the storm had passed, but rain was still falling steadily. Anna invited the 4 men into her house to dry off and warm up. Her kitchen was cozy and warm, with a big wood stove and the smell of fresh coffee. She gave them towels and poured coffee for everyone. "You boys look like you've been through a war," she said with a smile. Tom was still thinking about the cattle they had lost. "We lost at least 10 head, he said. "Maybe more. They scattered when the hail started. Cattle are smart," Anna said. "They'll find shelter and wait for the storm to pass. In the morning, we can look for them. I know this country pretty well." Tom looked at her with surprise. "You'd help us look for them?" "Of course," Anna said. "That's what neighbors do." As they sat around Anna's kitchen table, drinking coffee and listening to the rain on the roof, Tom learned more about his rescuer. She had lived on this ranch with her husband until he died in an accident 2 years ago. Since then, she had been running it by herself. "It's not easy," she said, "but this land means everything to me. My husband and I had so many plans for this place." Tom understood that feeling. Land got into your blood. Once it did, you couldn't imagine living anywhere else. "What kind of cattle do you run?" Pete asked. Anna's face lit up. "Come and see tomorrow. I think you'll be interested." That night, Tom slept in Anna's guest room. It was the first real bed he had slept in for days, but he couldn't sleep well. He kept thinking about the cattle they had lost and what that meant for his chances of saving the ranch. Outside, the rain kept falling. Tom hoped it would help the drought back home, but he knew it was probably too late for this year's grass. He also hoped that Anna was right about finding the lost cattle in the morning. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Tom thought about the kindness Anna had shown to complete strangers. Not many people would open their doors to muddy cowboys and a herd of cattle in the middle of a storm. Maybe there was still some good left in the world after all. Tom woke up to the sound of birds singing. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he remembered the storm, the lost cattle, and Anna's kindness. Sunlight was streaming through the window of the guest room. The storm was over. He got dressed quickly and went outside. The air smelled fresh and clean, like it only does after a good rain. Puddles of water were everywhere, and the ground was still muddy, but the sky was clear and blue. Anna was already up, feeding chickens in her yard. She smiled when she saw Tom. "Good morning," she said. "Coffee's ready inside. The other boys are already up and checking on your cattle." Tom found Pete, Jimmy, and Carlos in the corral with the cattle. They were counting heads and checking to make sure none of the animals were hurt from the storm. "How many do we have?" Tom asked. 32, Pete said. "We lost 8 head for sure." Tom's heart sank. 8 head was a lot of money. Money he couldn't afford to lose. But at least 32 cattle had made it through the storm safely. "The cattle look good," Jimmy said. "A little tired, but not hurt." Anna walked up with a cup of coffee for Tom. "I was thinking we could ride out and look for your missing cattle after breakfast. I know all the places around here where animals go to hide from storms." "You really don't have to do that," Tom said. "You've already done so much." "I want to help," Anna said. "Besides, I know this land better than anyone. We'll find them." After breakfast, Anna saddled her horse, a beautiful brown mare named Luna. Tom saddled his horse too. Pete stayed behind with Jimmy and Carlos to watch the herd. As they rode away from Anna's ranch, Tom got his first good look at her operation. Her corrals were well built and strong. Her barn was in perfect condition. Everything was neat and organized. This was the ranch of someone who really knew what they were doing. "How long have you been ranching?" Tom asked as they rode across a small hill. "My whole life," Anna said. "My father was a rancher in Mexico before he came here. I grew up around cattle. When I married David, we bought this place and fixed it up together." "David was your husband?" "Yes, he died in a horse accident 2 years ago." Anna's voice was sad but strong. "It was hard for a while. People said I should sell the ranch and move to town, but this place is in my blood." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, looking for signs of the lost cattle. Anna seemed to know every hill and valley for miles around. "There," she said, pointing to a grove of trees near a small creek. "Let's check over there." They found 3 of the missing cattle standing in the shade of the trees. The animals looked tired but healthy. Anna helped Tom drive them back toward her ranch. 5 more to go, Tom said. They spent the morning riding across the countryside, checking every place where cattle might take shelter. Anna showed Tom parts of the land he never would have found on his own. Hidden valleys, small caves, thick groves of trees. "Your cattle are smart," Anna said as they found 2 more head near a rocky outcropping. They found the best shelter around. By noon, they had found 6 of the 8 missing cattle. Tom was grateful, but he was also worried about time. The auction in Millfield was tomorrow. Even if they found the last 2 cattle, they would have to leave today to make it in time. As they stopped to rest the horses by a creek, Anna asked, "What's so important about this auction in Millfield?" Tom told her about the drought, the bills, and the bank payment that was due in 60 days. He explained how 4 generations of his family had worked the same ranch, and how he might be the one to lose it all. Anna listened without saying anything. When Tom finished talking, she was quiet for a long time. "How much do you think you'll get for 38 head?" she asked. Tom did the math in his head. Even at good prices, 38 head wouldn't be enough to save the ranch. He would need at least 50 head to make enough money to pay his bills and keep going. "Not enough," he said quietly. They found 1 more of the missing cattle that afternoon, but the last one was nowhere to be found. As the sun started getting low in the sky, Anna suggested they head back to her ranch. "We need to load your cattle and get them on the road if you're going to make Millfield tomorrow," she said. Tom nodded, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. 37 head wasn't going to save his ranch. Maybe it would pay off some of the smaller bills, but the bank payment was too big. He was probably going to lose everything anyway. When they got back to Anna's ranch, she asked if Tom wanted to see her cattle before he left. "Sure," Tom said, though he wasn't really interested. He was too worried about his own problems. Anna led him to a pasture behind her house. About 50 head of cattle were grazing there. But these weren't ordinary cattle. They were smaller than Tom's animals, but they looked incredibly healthy. Their coats were shiny, their eyes were bright, and even after the drought, they looked well fed. "What kind of cattle are these?" Tom asked. "A special breed my husband and I developed," Anna said proudly. "We spent 10 years crossing different types of cattle to create animals that could survive in this climate. They need less water, less food, and they're resistant to diseases that kill other cattle." Tom stared at the cattle. He had never seen animals that looked so healthy during a drought. "They're beautiful," he said, "but I don't understand. How do they survive when other cattle are struggling?" Anna smiled. David was a genius with animals. He studied which cattle breeds came from dry climates originally. Then he figured out how to breed cattle that could thrive here, even in bad years. She showed Tom around her ranch, explaining how everything worked. She had special grasses that grew with very little water. She had a system for rotating the cattle so the land never got overgrazed. She even had a way to collect rainwater so nothing was wasted. "This is amazing," Tom said. "You've figured out how to ranch in a way that works with the drought instead of fighting it." "David figured it out," Anna said. "I just kept his dream alive after he died." As they walked back to the house, Tom couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Anna had created something incredible here, a way to raise cattle that could survive anything. But she was doing it all by herself, and Tom could see that was hard. That evening, as Tom prepared to load his cattle for the trip to Millfield, Anna made dinner for all the cowboys. They sat around her kitchen table eating and talking about cattle and ranching. "How many head do you run here?" Pete asked Anna. "About 50 breeding cows and 2 bulls," Anna said. "It's not a big operation, but it's sustainable. Even in the worst drought, my cattle stay healthy." Tom listened to Anna talk about her ranching methods, and an idea started forming in his mind. A crazy idea that might be the answer to both their problems. But it was so crazy he didn't dare say it out loud. Not yet. As the sun set over Anna's ranch, Tom made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of loading the cattle tonight, he would wait until morning. He wanted to think about this idea that was growing in his head. Maybe there was another way to save his ranch. Maybe 37 head of cattle wasn't the end of his dreams. Maybe it was the beginning of something completely new. "Anna," he said as they finished dinner, "would you mind if we stayed one more night? I'd like to talk to you about something." Anna looked surprised but pleased. "Of course," she said. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." That night, Tom lay in bed thinking about Anna's cattle, her methods, and the crazy idea that was taking shape in his mind. By morning, he would have to decide whether to take his cattle to Millfield or try something completely different. Something that could save both their ranches. Tom barely slept that night. His mind was spinning with ideas, possibilities, and fears. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Anna's healthy cattle and her amazing ranch setup. Then he would think about his own dying ranch and the bank payment due in 60 days. By 4 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep. He got dressed quietly and went outside. The stars were still bright in the sky and the air was cool and fresh. He walked over to the corral where his cattle were resting. 37 head. It wasn't enough to save his ranch the old way. But maybe there was a new way. Anna was already up when Tom went back to the house. She was making coffee and breakfast for everyone. "You're up early," she said with a smile. "Couldn't sleep?" "Not really," Tom said. "I've been thinking about what you showed me yesterday." Pete, Jimmy, and Carlos came in for breakfast. They were ready to load the cattle and head for Millfield. The auction started this afternoon and they had a long drive ahead of them. "Boss, we should get moving," Pete said. "If we leave in the next hour, we can make it to Millfield by noon." Tom nodded, but he didn't move to get ready. Instead, he sat at Anna's kitchen table with his coffee, staring out the window at her beautiful ranch. "Tom," Anna said gently, "is everything okay?" Tom took a deep breath. The idea that had been forming in his mind all night was crazy, but sometimes crazy ideas were the only ones that worked. "Anna, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How would you feel about a partner?" Anna looked confused. "What kind of partner?" Tom's heart was beating fast. This was the biggest risk he had ever taken in his life. But doing nothing was also a risk. "A ranching partner," Tom said. "Someone who could help you expand your operation. Someone who has cattle and experience but needs to learn new methods." The kitchen got very quiet. Pete, Jimmy, and Carlos stopped eating and looked at Tom like he had lost his mind. "Tom," Pete said carefully, "we need to get to Millfield." "Maybe we don't," Tom said. He turned to Anna. "I've been thinking about this all night. You have the most amazing ranch operation I've ever seen. Cattle that can survive anything. Methods that work with nature instead of fighting it. But you're doing it all alone, and that's hard." Anna was listening carefully, but she didn't say anything. "I have cattle, equipment, and 20 years of ranching experience. But my methods aren't working anymore. The drought is killing me, Maybe we could help each other." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Anna asked. Tom's mouth was dry, but he kept talking. "A partnership. I sell my ranch and use the money to invest in expanding your operation. We combine your knowledge with my cattle and experience. We build something new together." Pete dropped his fork. "Tom, are you sure about this? You'd be giving up the family ranch." "The family ranch is dying anyway," Tom said. "Maybe it's time to try something different." Anna was quiet for a long time. She got up and refilled everyone's coffee cups, thinking. "Tom," she said finally, "this ranch means everything to me. It's where I built my life with David. It's where his dreams are buried. I can't just hand that over to someone I met 2 days ago." Tom felt his heart sink. Of course she would say no. It was a crazy idea. But Anna wasn't finished talking. "However," she said, sitting back down, "I've been struggling to expand the way David and I planned. I don't have enough cattle to really prove that our methods work on a large scale, and running this place alone is harder than I like to admit." She looked directly at Tom. "If we did this, it would have to be a real partnership, equal say in all decisions. Your cattle would become our cattle. Your success would be my success, and my success would be yours. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Tom said. Anna got up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. She pulled out a thick folder and brought it back to the table. David and I made a 5-year plan for this ranch, she said, opening the folder. We wanted to expand to 500 head of our special cattle. We calculated that we could make more money per head than traditional ranches because our cattle cost less to maintain and stay healthy in any weather. She showed Tom pages of charts, graphs, and calculations. David had been incredibly thorough. He had figured out exactly how much water, food, and land their special cattle needed. He had calculated profits for different-sized herds. He had even planned which pastures to use for grazing rotation. This is incredible, Tom said, studying the papers. David was a genius. He was, Anna said with pride. But he died before we could put the plan into action. I've been trying to do it alone, but I needed more cattle and more help to make it work. Tom looked at the numbers. If David's calculations were right, a ranch run with these methods could make money even in drought years. It wouldn't be easy, but it could work. How many cattle would we need to start? Tom asked. About 100 head, Anna said. Enough to really test the system and prove it works. Tom had 37 head from his current trip. Anna had 50 head already on her ranch. Together they would have 87 head. Close to the target. What about my ranch back home? Tom asked. I'd have to sell it to make this work. How much land do you have? Anna asked. 800 acres. Anna's eyes lit up. With the money from selling that land, we could buy more of David's special cattle from other breeders. We could also build the facilities we need to handle a bigger herd. They spent the next 2 hours going through David's plans in detail. The more Tom learned, the more excited he became. This wasn't just a way to save his ranch. This was a way to build something completely new and better. There's one more thing, Anna said. If we do this, I want to name the ranch after David, the Martinez-Riley Ranch. His dream should be part of the name. I'd be honored, Tom said. Pete had been listening to everything without saying much. Finally, he spoke up. Tom, I've known you since you were a boy. I worked for your father and your grandfather. This is the biggest decision your family has ever faced. I know, Tom said, but I think it's the right decision. Pete continued. Your grandfather would have understood. He took risks to build that ranch in the first place. Maybe it's time to take another risk to save it. Jimmy and Carlos nodded in agreement. Anna stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at her cattle grazing in the pasture. Tom, if we do this, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready to give up everything your family built to try something new? Tom looked out the window too. Anna's cattle looked so healthy and content. They had survived a terrible drought without losing weight or getting sick. They represented a future that could work. Anna, Tom said, my family built that ranch to raise cattle and make a living from the land. If I can do that better here with you, then I'm not giving up on my family's dream. I'm making it bigger. Anna turned around and looked at him. There were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. In that case, she said, let's be partners. Tom felt like a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in months, he could see a future that didn't involve losing everything. But there was still a lot of work to do. They would need lawyers to draw up partnership agreements. Tom would have to go back home and sell his ranch. They would have to buy more cattle and build new facilities. This won't be easy, Anna warned. Starting a new operation is always risky. I know, Tom said. But trying to save a dying ranch was risky too. At least this way, we're working towards something instead of just trying to survive. That afternoon, instead of loading his cattle for Millfield, Tom called the auction house and told them he wouldn't be coming. Then he called his real estate agent back home and told him to put the ranch up for sale. Pete, Jimmy, and Carlos decided to stay and help with the new operation. They believed in Tom's decision, and they wanted to be part of building something new. As the sun set over Anna's ranch, their ranch now, Tom felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope for the future. Tomorrow they would start planning their new life together. Tonight they would celebrate the beginning of the Martinez-Riley Ranch. 6 months later, Tom stood on the same porch where he had first met Anna, but everything was different now. The drought had finally broken 2 months ago, and green grass was growing in the pastures again. But more importantly, the ranch was thriving in ways he had never imagined possible. The Martinez-Riley Ranch now had 120 head of cattle. They were all the special breed that Anna and David had developed. Even during the worst parts of the drought, these cattle had stayed healthy and strong. Tom had sold his family's ranch for enough money to pay off all his debts and invest heavily in the new operation. It had been hard to say goodbye to the land his great-grandfather had settled, but he knew he was doing the right thing. The morning sun was just coming up as Tom walked to the barn. Anna was already there, checking on a cow that was about to have a calf. This would be one of the first calves born on the Martinez-Riley ranch, and they were both excited. "How's she doing?" Tom asked. "Perfect," Anna said with a smile. "This calf should be born today, our first official Martinez-Riley baby." Tom grinned. In 6 months, Anna had taught him more about cattle than he had learned in 20 years of ranching the old way. Her methods were completely different from what his family had always done, but they worked better than anything he had ever seen. Pete came into the barn carrying a cup of coffee. At 72 years old, he should have been thinking about retirement. Instead, he was more excited about ranching than he had been in years. "Morning, boss," Pete said to Tom. Then he turned to Anna. "Morning, other boss." They had all gotten used to having two bosses. Tom and Anna made every important decision together, just like they had planned. Sometimes they disagreed, but they always worked it out. They made a good team. "The cattle in the south pasture are ready to move," Pete reported. "They've eaten that grass down to the right level." This was another thing Tom had learned from Anna. Instead of letting cattle graze in one place until the grass was gone, they moved the cattle every few days. This kept the grass healthy and actually made it grow better. It was more work, but it was worth it. "I'll move them after breakfast," Tom said. Anna looked up from the cow she was examining. "Actually, I was thinking we should move them to the east pasture instead of the west pasture. The grass there is just reaching the perfect height." Tom nodded. Anna had an amazing eye for grass and grazing. She could look at a pasture and know exactly when it was ready for cattle and when the cattle needed to move to let it recover. As they walked back to the house for breakfast, Tom thought about how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been desperate and scared, facing the loss of everything his family had built. Now he was part of something new and exciting. The house was different too. Anna had moved some of her things to make room for Tom's belongings. The kitchen table where they had first talked about partnership was now covered with plans for expanding the ranch even more. "I got a call yesterday from Dr. Wilson at the Agricultural College," Anna said as she made breakfast. "He wants to bring a group of students out to see our operation." "What for?" Tom asked. "He's heard about what we're doing here. Cattle that can thrive in drought conditions, pasture management that actually improves the land instead of wearing it out. He thinks we're doing something important." Tom felt a surge of pride, not just for himself but for Anna and for David's memory. They were proving that David's ideas worked. "When does he want to come?" Tom asked. "Next month. And get this, he wants to write an article about us for the state agricultural magazine." Tom whistled. "That could bring us a lot of attention." "Good attention, I hope," Anna said. "Other ranchers who are struggling with drought could learn from what we're doing here." After breakfast, Tom went out to move the cattle while Anna stayed with the cow that was about to give birth. Moving cattle with Anna's methods was different from the old way. Instead of driving the cattle with horses and noise, they used the animals' natural instincts to guide them where they wanted to go. Tom opened a gate to the east pasture and put out fresh salt licks and mineral blocks. Then he simply waited. Within an hour, the cattle had moved themselves to the new pasture, following their noses to the fresh grass and minerals. It was like magic, but it was really just understanding how cattle think and what they want. When Tom got back to the barn, he found Anna grinning from ear to ear. The cow had given birth to a healthy bull calf. The little animal was already standing and nursing from his mother. "He's perfect," Anna said. "Look at those strong legs and that broad chest. This is exactly what David hoped for when he designed the breeding program." Tom looked at the calf and felt a deep satisfaction. This little animal represented everything they were working toward. Cattle that could thrive in any conditions, raised on land that was getting healthier instead of more worn out. "What should we name him?" Tom asked. Anna thought for a moment. "Hope," she said, "because that's what he represents." That afternoon, Tom and Anna rode out to check on the cattle in the different pastures. This had become their favorite time of day. Just the two of them, riding across their land, planning for the future. "Tom," Anna said as they stopped on a hill overlooking the main herd, "I want to tell you something." What's that? When David died, I thought my ranching dreams died with him. I couldn't imagine how I could make his vision work by myself. I was just trying to survive and keep his memory alive. Tom listened without interrupting. But working with you these past 6 months has brought those dreams back to life. We're not just surviving now. We're building something amazing. Tom felt his throat get tight with emotion. Anna, 6 months ago I was about to lose everything my family had worked for. You saved me. This partnership saved me. They sat on their horses in comfortable silence, watching their cattle graze contentedly in the green pasture below. You know what the best part is? Anna said. What? We're just getting started. In 5 years, this ranch could be 10 times bigger. We could be helping ranchers all over the state learn these methods. We could be part of changing how cattle ranching works. Tom smiled. Anna was right. They were just getting started. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tom thought about the night he had met Anna. He had been desperate then, caught in a storm with his cattle scattered and his dreams falling apart. Anna, he said, I want to tell you something that might sound crazy. What's that? Tom looked at her, this amazing woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word. Over the past 6 months, their business partnership had grown into something deeper. They weren't just working together anymore. They were building a life together. That night when the storm hit and I knocked on your door, I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me. I thought I was losing everything. And now? Anna asked. Tom took her hand. Now I know it was the best thing that ever happened to me. One night with you is worth more than all my cattle. Anna squeezed his hand and smiled. That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I mean it, Tom said. The cattle, the ranch, the success, and all of that is wonderful. But you're what makes it all worthwhile. As the stars came out over the Martinez-Riley ranch, Tom and Anna made plans for their future. They would expand the cattle operation. They would teach other ranchers about sustainable methods. They would build a life together that honored both David's memory and Tom's family legacy. But most importantly, they would do it together. The little bull calf they had named Hope was sleeping peacefully in the barn with his mother. Tomorrow he would take his first steps outside, into the green pastures of a ranch that proved dreams could come true, even after the worst storms. And on this ranch, Hope wasn't just the name of a calf. It was the foundation of everything they were building together.